Hello, Govind. You there?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Yeah. So, I see that you're the only one who's come today. So,
It's still an early session, still early, sir.
yeah. So we'll wait for like 2-3 minutes more.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Did you receive an SMS or something
SMS.
to remind you of the class? I don't know.
Well, it's on every Friday, right, sir? So of course I remember.
No. But there is this email that comes every time, right?
Oh, you mean that I get it both in WhatsApp and the mail.
All right. Okay. Sure. Cool. Thank you. All right, it's already 6:05, and nobody else has joined, so I might as well start with you.
Sure. I'm just wondering what would have happened if even I had not attended, sir.
I would have just recorded something and uploaded it.
Right. Okay, let's start, sir.
Sure. All right. Were you able to watch the videos this time?
I have watched till week 9, sir, but I have not yet watched week 10.
All right.
So I'm attending week this session based on my own prior ability.
Ah. Just a second. Yeah. So the first question is there on the screen. Oh shit. Oh, I'm sorry. Uh, Give me a moment.
In the previous recorded in one of the previous live lectures, Robin sir mentioned that he would there would be some kind of evolution based question paper here. Is that today?
Not with me. I think I'll take it up with Chiti. Probably she can do it.
Sure, thanks, sir.
Which one was it, by the way? Which paper are you talking about?
Well, during that live session with VP Robin, he mentioned that me and Lakshmi were a bit doubtful on evolution, and that you might hold some paper based on Darwin's finches and said principles as an example.
Okay. Darwin's principle. Okay, I think I'll tell it to Chiti. I haven't prepared that part. Uh, yeah. All right. Anyway, so yeah. I mean, if you have seen the answer, then it's okay. But just read through the question and we can go ahead. So since there are not many people, you can just tell me the answer.
Um, A,
Yeah, so the answer is right.
my reasoning, right, sir?
Yeah.
The question altitude for latitude temperature model is that general biogeographical patterns resulting from climatic conditions imposed on plants and mountains should be observed in neighboring lowland regions with similar temperature and moisture regimes. So basically, compare the lowland parts with higher altitudes and mountains in the same region, right, sir?
Yeah.
And and the question being increase in temperature, what kind of migration we would witness? The obvious one would be the plants in the lowland region which can't take the heat would slowly be forced to migrate in to higher latitudes if possible, right, sir? Higher altitude.
Yeah.
So A is the option that fits from meters to kilometers, high increasing altitude to cope with the high increase in temperature.
So what does it mean? So if a plant is in, say, on the lowlands of, okay, so the lowlands of, I don't know, southern Russia, what would it mean with 1 degree increase in temperature?
Well, I don't think there are any mountains in Russia since it's mostly the steppe.
Huh.
I think it would not survive.
No, so then you didn't get the concept. I mean, so basically, what it's trying to say is, so whatever happens, the plants will move. Like even if they are on the mountains or if they are on the plains. So to survive the temperature increase, the only thing is, but the plants or the animals would. So what would be the direction on the mountains? What are you
Oh,
saying? The direction on the
yeah.
mountains?
It would move to higher altitudes, right,
Okay,
sir?
and on the plains, you're saying there is no
It
movement at all.
well, I'm sorry, I get the answer now. It would move higher latitude.
Yes. So there's a higher latitude. So there the temperatures are lower. I mean, at least lower than tropical. So there would be big seasonality, but at least the temperatures would be low. So if they are in, if the plants are in southern Russia, that would mean that it would move towards.
The northern Russia,
Yeah.
Siberia, maybe.
Yeah, so that's the movement. So basically, polewards. So similarly, in southern hemisphere, it would move towards the south pole. It won't move towards the north pole.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So it's similar to how the plants or animals would move on the mountains as well. But yeah, the distances are very different. Even this was covered even in Mansi's. I don't know if you have seen the list of the lectures for week 10.
It, I listened to Mansi's live lecture, so sir.
Oh,
I've not watched the other two, but I watched the live lecture.
all right, great, great. So yeah, so there also she talks about how when she was sampling in Eastern Ghats, the Eagle Nest, the same difference in temperature that one can get like in 200 kilometers, she was almost getting it in like over 20 kilometers of increase in elevation. So basically 20 kilometers hike, and she could get the same kind of difference in temperature between the lower and the upper
Yes, sir.
mountains.
But you mentioned Eastern Ghats. I thought it was in East Himalayas.
Oh, did I say Eastern Ghats? No, it was East Himalayas. What I meant.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyways, so yeah. So this is how it is. This is the diagram I got from some paper called Jump et al. 2009, where so yeah, over here what you can see is just a sec. Yeah. So basically, on the plains, the distance covered to survive like 1 degree rise in temperature. This direction is not polewards, north or south, whatever. So distance covered to survive 1 degree increase in temperature would be 145 kilometers on the plain, whereas on the mountains, the same distance covered would be 167 meter. So that's
I see, sir. It's equivalent height for latitude.
Yeah, but it's interesting how actually it happens on the ground. It's not it's not like how we expect. Also because especially, I mean, people have done this kind of study for mount trees, and they have seen that there are these edges forming, like where the trees are dying out, and where the new areas introduced, new areas where the trees are being introduced where they were not found before. So that kind of a range shift is happening already in certain areas. So
So like there are like these barriers in which the trees are dying and the new trees are appearing.
barriers, no. I mean, this is on the plains that I'm talking about, especially in US. where the range of the trees is actually moving as we. I mean, so there are these. The southern parts of the range which where the trees are dying out very visibly, whereas in the northern part of the range the trees are coming up. There are like these introductions where the trees were not found before, like that.
I see, sir.
So, so
Could
yeah,
you send the name of the paper?
I'll look into it and tell you. Yeah.
Right, sir. Could I also present a theory on how some plants might move?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, I think plants move. Plants would have some kind of symbiotic relationship with some kind of corresponding animal or bird, and with an increase in temperature, the animals might also move a similar distance,
Yeah.
and therefore, since this relationship would in turn drag the plants with them, and vice versa. Does that seem accurate?
So you think the animals would move first and the plants would move later?
Well, not necessarily, but I think I don't think I'm not. It's not the order that's the issue that I'm presenting. I think both the animals and the plants would facilitate each other's, help each other's movement.
Yeah, possibly that's true. Yeah. All right. So yeah. So hi Harini, you know the protocol. Just drop your answer in the chat box. And in fact, if you're only two people, then I'll rather hear it from you. You don't have to use the chat box, I suppose. Harini, have you gone through the videos this week? Week 10? You there? Sorry, am I audible?
Sir, with regards to the question, the Himalayan range with hourglass shape, the shape of the range is in an hourglass.
Sorry, I'll explain. So what were you saying? Sorry, go ahead again.
The Himalayan range being in an hourglass shape, it refers to the entire range being in an hourglass shape.
No. Okay. So, so Harini, have you gone through the lecture, the week 10? Yes, I was asking you. Sorry.
Yes, I did, but I'm forgetting stuff now.
All
I'm
right.
not too sure. Yeah.
All right. No, just wanted to check. Because this was there and this was there.
Yes, I remember the shapes, and typically we think of it as a triangle, but it is not. I remember that bit.
Yeah.
But I've forgotten the shapes and stuff. So,
Okay. So basically, if you look at the just a sec. So if you look at this diagram, you understand more. So basically, this was when this guy Morgan Tingley, he was walking his dog and he realized that there are certain elevation where it was more he was walking from up the mountain, down the mountain to the up the mountain and coming back or something like that, and he realized that this is like an anecdote that my supervisor told me how he came across this theory. So he realized that there were certain elevations where he was spending a lot more time, and there were certain elevations where he was like immediately it just changed. So he got intrigued, and then he realized that there are certain like mountains do not have equivalent areas at all elevation. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah, I got that, sir.
Yeah.
I got that part. I just didn't get the hourglass part.
Okay. So basically, if you see like this over here, This is a mountain range with like there's like a defined boundary to it, and yellow is the higher part, green is the middle part, and deep blue is the lower part. So you can see over here the deep blue is slightly less, yellow is also less, but green is like a lot more area. So that's what it shows over here. This is more like a diamond shape where the middle areas have more area than the other two extreme. Similarly, in the apps over here, um, the blues are high, and the greens go low, and then even further low. I mean, even further less are these yellow parts. So basically, this is more the pyramid. Pyramid is more like what we are used to, and there are certain mountains which actually show pyramidal distribution of area according to the elevation. But then there are other mountains where you'll find that the lower elevations do not have much area, and the higher elevations have much more area. So basically that would mean like how this, I mean, this is basically a combination of the slope and stuff like that. So how steep the mountains are and stuff like that. So in Himalayas, what you see is the lower portion and the higher portions are both high, but in the middle elevations, the area covered by the middle elevations are extremely low. So that gives it an hourglass shape. That is not how the Himalayas look like. It's just the area distribution with respect to the elevation.
I get that, sir.
Yeah, it's just the area covered within within that particular elevation. So if you cut the mountain into smaller like bands of 100 meter, 200 meter, 50 meter, you'll see that the 50 meter band has much less area. The middle elevation would have much less area, or whatever the middle band. Say for example, Himalayas have a height from 0 to 8,000 meter, right? So the middle elevation would be somewhere between, yeah, over here you can see 4,000, 5,000. So yeah. So anyway, so this is how he came up on this idea, and that's when we realized that not all mountains are this pyramidal shape, but they have different shapes, and based on that, he also proposed that what would be the consequences of what would be the consequence of this, and different mountains. So from the last question we knew that with climate change we might see a range shift in certain species, plants, animals, birds, all kinds of species. So when that happened, what would be the effect of these range shifts based on the shapes of the mountain? Yeah. So what do you think the answer would be? There are three people now. So Harini says A. Govind says A. Vikas, do you have something? Some answer?
Well, I feel the with the rise in temperature, the species would move higher slopes to the higher altitude, and since lowland species would move progressively higher, and the middle area has less area, so that most of the species would be concentrated in the high altitude.
Yeah.
Is that an accurate assessment, sir?
Just a sec, let me check the answer. Okay. So middle altitude, okay. So yeah, so basically that would mean that the lower altitude species would have lesser area to move to when they are moving towards the newer area. Middle elevation, they will have lesser area. Similarly, middle altitude species would have much greater area when they're moving higher up in the slope. Yeah, so yeah, what you said is right, Govind. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Could I have an example?
Yeah, sure.
Well, it's not about birds though. These are a group of monkeys, primates called geladas. They're called gelada baboons, and they live in these mountains of Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Actually, they're not baboons. They're a completely separate group of monkeys which have no close relatives. So they live in the high slopes of the Ethiopian mountains, and they feed on specific kinds of grass there. And with an increase in global warming and higher population in Ethiopia, they are progressively being forced up into the higher altitudes, sir. That's where I have an idea of this concept.
Okay. So this was the question, Harini. You want to give it a read? Vikas and Harini, since you've been a little late, so can you give it a read and give me the answer? We've already discussed this with Govind like a while back. Harini, do you have an answer? Vikas says no idea. Vikas, you want to just guess? What?
I'm just trying to first understand the diagram. On the x-axis, I'm moving from the equator to the poles.
Yeah.
And on the y-axis, I'm moving elevation.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah.
And then what am I trying to say with the increase in temperature? No, I can't figure this out.
All right. So you've heard of this thing, right, where climate change is coming and there would be consequences on species and stuff like that. You are aware of that, right?
Yes.
So climate change would mean that there would be like an increase in temperature, and that would mean that certain species which are very temperature sensitive would move to areas which are of temperature of lesser, lesser temperature, right? So what happens to species on plains and what happens to species on mountains? So on mountains, you can guess where would they move? Where would they move, Harini and Vikas?
To the high altitudes.
Yeah, because you agree with that, Vikas, right? You can just write it in the chat box if you don't want to speak. So with the climate change, with the increase in temperature, it might happen that the species, both animals and plants, can move to a colder region, and that would mean that on mountains, species from lower elevation might go to a higher elevation. But on plains, it's a similar thing. But from the diagram, can you tell me, Harini? So just a sec, Govind. From the diagram, can you tell me, Harini, how would the animals move if it's on the plain, or animals or plants or whatever?
To the I guess the higher latitudes,
Yeah,
which
to
mean
the
the colder,
poles, yeah.
closer to the poles,
Yeah,
from
yeah.
tropics to the temperate and so on and so forth.
Yes.
But
So
is that happening? I don't know.
It is happening, and there are papers that I also promised Govind that I'll share with them. But I don't know. I mean, once I finish this thing, but yeah, you can also look into this, like how it's easy to find these papers on Google Scholar. But yeah, that's what happens. But the degree of the movement, the degree of shift would be different for plains and for mountains. So that's the degree that we're talking about. Like for the plains, there would like mountains are just like what, 8 kilometers high. Like the highest is 8.4 or 8.5. So and but the earth is like a little vast. The plains are a little vast. So there would be like a much higher degree of much higher difference between what movement happens on the mountains and what movement or what distance is covered on the plains. So the next thing, so basically the answer is 167 meter to 145 kilometers. Yes, Govind, yeah, tell me.
Well, just before that, in the first question, like, sir, could you bring that up for a second? Yeah, well, I didn't see any numbers or any distances mentioned in the graph. How are we supposed to guess that A is the exact answer? I mean, C also has a similar increase in altitude. C could be equally relevant. I mean, I chose A because I
C could be
saw it.
equally relevant. Look at C again.
Oh,
Oh, it's
sorry.
meters, not kilometers, Govind. Yeah.
But
167 meters.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did copy this question, but yeah, I was smart at that time, so yeah, it helped. So I mean, copied from my last lecture. I mean, I didn't have.
But D is also shows a fairly substantial increase in altitude. Uh, so, uh, would 1 degree in Celsius mean a tremendous increase in altitude?
At 145 kilometers, none of the mountains are that high, right? So
Doesn't make sense, right?
the highest is 8 kilometers or 8 point whatever, 8 point something.
Yeah. So the next figure would exactly explain how it is. So like this is the plains, and if this is the pole, so it could be north or south, whichever. So basically, if there is a 1 degree temperature increase, then the trees or the animals have to move approximately 145 kilometer polewards, whereas the same mountains, the distances are low, so it's been zoomed in over here. So that would be only about 167 meter, and that would achieve like a decrease in the temperature of about 1 degree Celsius. So that's the whole paper about. Is
Any proof of any species having moved
there are
latitudinally so
the
far?
latitudinally there are trees that have been so basically, like I was telling Govind, there have been cases where at least the studies in US where the trees have a certain range. So certain range in the sense that it covers like a band from the east of America to the west of America, and people have seen that the southern edge of the band, trees are dying out, and the northern edge of the band where the trees were not or beyond the northern edge of the band where the trees were not seen before, there are new saplings or seedlings coming up at on that northern edge. So there are papers. Probably you can check at Google Scholar. But yeah, yeah, Govind, go ahead.
I just thought of something, sir. If animals and plants, especially the animals in this case, would have to move higher altitudes, that would present newer challenges too. Like for example, lesser oxygen. If they move sufficiently higher, there'll be less oxygen and air pressure. Wouldn't that be present a problem?
Um,
Well,
so
if you move high enough, the lack of oxygen could be an issue.
yeah, I mean, so the oxygen, I mean, but that also depends on the species, right? There are elevation migrants that we talked about during long back, but Sahas's class, right? Where the species
Uh,
are, yeah, moving between like thousands of kilometers
yes, sir.
up and down. Then there are residents that do not move at all. But then the movement, so suppose in the future we are talking about like what, 3 degrees Celsius or 4 degrees Celsius or whatever. I mean, I'm just assuming if the RCP 8.0 is something that continues, then there would be 4 degrees Celsius of increase of temperature. That would mean that it's about 400 or 500 meters. That isn't exactly a big difference in oxygen unless until you're already on the top of the mountain. So yeah.
And underwater, sir.
Underwater, people usually say that the movement is polewards. I don't know about the
Uh,
depth. I don't know.
uh,
Yeah.
well, if in case of depth, the deeper the said animal goes, the greater the water pressure, so that will be a lot more
Yeah, I am not
complicated.
sure of the depth. I don't think people have studied, but yeah, you can check on that. But the only thing that I know about the water, the oceanic, the marine mammals and the marine, the other taxa is basically that there's a movement that people have seen polewards. But
Yes.
yeah, all right.
Also, the most of the ocean's nutrients are concentrated at uh, the higher zones, sir. The the surface and close to the coasts, close to the coastal regions. The deeper and the deeper you go and the further you go into the open ocean, the lesser the nutrients and resources. So, like, even though the ocean itself is huge, all the nutrients are very focused on the surface and especially close to the coasts. Like, and the very deeper regions of the open ocean, like say the abyssal zone or the twilight zone, they are completely like large deserts.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Most of the food there is from ocean snow, which is all the nutrients that
Come
floats from the
from
surface.
the surface. Yeah. Anyways, the question. So 3 is on the screen. I think it's a simple one. Harini says probably adapt with higher. Yeah, yeah. The adaptation is something that people have taken into account. So yeah, probably that might happen. But like I said, like even if with 4 degrees Celsius, the increase would be about 500 meter. Not much of a difference when it comes to air pressure or oxygen level or something.
So there are a lot more reasons to the third question, right, sir?
Yeah, there are a lot more reasons. There are five, six more that people have said. Yeah. All right. So this question was kind of easy, so I'll just skip this. Because the answer is all of the above. So to explain, major extinction processes are usually. Okay. So the major extinction processes are usually that happen in the last few years, where the glacial maxima and glacial minima. I'm not sure if you guys know about it, but if you have seen the movie Ice Age, where that was one of the glacial maxima, where the glaciers were formed across the earth because it was cooler than usual. So there, because it was cooler, the ice had a lot of water, so the water receded from the ocean, and that's why a lot of land bridges were formed, which just meant that yeah. So apart from that, um, those were the like major extinction processes in tropics, and that affected mostly the lowland areas, the coastal areas, and the middle elevation, but not so much the higher elevation. So that's why, and but also when you're talking about tropics and temperates, the most drastic changes were in the temperates and not in tropics. And so yeah, that's why tropics are more species. The Bering Strait, an example. Yeah, yeah, yeah. High productivity, heterogeneous environment is basically because there are. How do you think heterogeneous environment can help in species? I mean, how do you think it can help?
Far more niches, right, sir?
Yeah, yeah.
There are also the uh, stable seasons, like not very high seasonalities. It's a relatively stable season there in the tropics, and also the tropics act as a refuge when such glacial maxims occurs. Two other examples, two other reasons.
Huh, yeah, yeah. So, Harini and Vikas, sorry, Ruzbe, did you understand what he meant by too many niches? Lot more niches in the tropics.
Yes,
Yes,
the tropics were the refugia during the ice age, and that's why they probably harbored more species, is what I remember having.
Yeah, yeah, that is one reason. Then
Yeah.
there are, yeah, then based because the tropics were also like the height of the trees was higher, and I mean a lot more things. So and the strata of the trees were higher, so there were like a lot more niches in that sense as well. So that's why a lot more species could segregate themselves, or yeah, at different heights, or at least different strata within the forest, so they could form like different species. So that kind of yeah, that kind of niche differentiation also happened because of the yeah. So that was one of the reasons why probably tropics have more species. Anyways, the next question is on your screen.
Also, sir, a fun fact: there have been 3 ice ages in Earth's history.
Yeah.
I think the first and second one was called Snowball Earth, right, sir?
Oh, I'm not sure of that. Huh?
Well, if I remember correctly, the first Snowball Earth saw the entire planet mostly covered in ice, and uh, after the end of the Snowball Earth period, you had the massive proliferation of cyanobacteria, which increased the oxygen of the planet.
That's not Ice Age.
Right.
Sorry.
Well, it's similar to the Ice Age, sir. This is like long before
Yeah,
complex life ever came.
but that's mass extinction. No, we are not talking about mass extinction. We're talking about ice ages right now.
Well, actually, not mass extinction, sir. This is even before complex life even came. It's
Okay.
like 600 something million years ago.
Hmm. Yeah. Anyways, so what was the answer that you gave? Sorry. For temperature. Okay. None of the above. Okay, so this was one of the papers. Oh, the paper ID. Guo et al. 2018. It's there. So, I mean, but this is something that one can easily see as well in our mountains of the country, where one can see that the temperature reduces with the elevation, but since there is a lot of anthropogenic activities that are happening in the lower elevation, which are also easily accessible from prehistoric times, and so that one of the reasons was because of that the forests were probably reduced, or probably forced to retreat to middle elevations from where they start, and they continue till higher elevation. This is definitely true for Western Ghats, and in Himalayas they continue till the tree line, where the beyond which the trees are not seen in the Himalayas. So that's why this weird pattern one can see in the forest cover along the elevation. So even though the temperature shows a very straight line, but the forest cover shows a curved line, which increases in the middle elevation and reduces back to zero in much higher elevation beyond the tree line. So both.
Sir, by
Yeah.
tree line you mean the forest cover?
Tree line is basically in very high mountains there are these zones, not line. Basically, these are zones beyond which the trees can't grow. So the mountains just don't allow trees to grow. So you can wait. I can give you.
After tree line, generally there is no vegetation due to
Yeah.
harsh condition there.
There is vegetation. Sorry? Who was this? Vikas.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I don't think there is. I don't think you can say there is no vegetation because there are these shrubs and grass.
Yes, seasonal vegetation there because due
Yeah.
to the snowfall
Yeah,
continued
yeah,
there.
yeah.
This is also called the timberline, basically
Timber
tree line
line or
or
tree
timberline.
line, yeah. So line marking the upper limit of tree growth in mountains or northern latitudes. So even beyond the northern latitudes, so you have these boreal zones where you have a lot of evergreen trees that grow. So these are the Siberian forest that you see in the movies of Russia and European movies, but beyond, or even Canadian movies. But beyond that is where the polar region starts, the Arctic region, and then Antarctic region where there are no vegetation. Like Vikas said, there would be seasonal. Once the summer comes, suddenly there's a lot of greenery that you see, but they die off as soon as the winter comes. So, yeah. Oh. So Harni says, remember reading that mid-elevation peak is more due to random nature. Harni, mid-elevation peak or the mid-domain is
Sorry, I misunderstood the question. Mid elevation peak was for species, for
yeah
birds,
for the birds.
not the forest cover.
Yeah.
I later on realized I'd understood it wrong.
Yeah. This wasn't covered in the lecture, but I thought it was very important since they were using these terms a lot, and I didn't think one could go ahead. All right. Yeah.
These weren't mentioned in the lecture, sir.
They went.
I remember reading this in my 10th grade.
Yeah. Okay, nobody wants to even give it a shot. I mean, like,
Well,
try.
I think the answer is C, sir.
Let's see.
Are we to select one or are we matching each to the other?
I mean, basically, what is A, B, and C? So the options are.
So A matches to either A, B, C, or D on the right. A of the text.
So A
No.
is sorry, both are A, but the option A has four this thing like A is allopatric, B is sympatric, parapatric, and peripatric. So that would mean that the first column, A column, is allopatric, second B is
Okay,
sympatric.
got
Yeah.
it now. I misunderstood and I was trying to match each one to one of these.
Sorry.
I did that too at first, but then I switched my game later, sir.
All right. I'll. Okay. Yes, Rajshri. Rajshri, you have raised your hand. Do you have a question or something? Right. So the answer is C. Yes, A is allopatric. This is it. Yeah. A is allopatric, B is peripatric, C is parapatric, and D is sympatric. So everyone understood what the diagram is trying to say, right?
Oh, yes, sir. The different steps and each step has to be matched to the options
No.
A,
I'm not
B,
talking
C.
about the technical. I'm talking about the diagram.
Yes, sir.
Speciation types. Yeah, how speciation happens. Um, yeah, it's types of speciation. So like in the allopatric, what happens is usually there would be a whole population, and then suddenly a barrier could form. How could a barrier form? I mean, this is based on what we just discussed in the last half an hour or something.
Continental drift.
That is one way, continental drift. How could the other barriers? How could okay, continental drift is something very way in the past. Can you talk about a very recent historic past, like some 10,000 years?
Relatively speaking, it would be
20,000
habitat
years.
fragmentation,
All right. Anything else? Anyone else?
sea level change.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Species moving higher on higher elevations and then getting cut off because there's lowland separating peaks.
Yeah. So yeah, forest logging is also yeah. So that the barriers can be formed, and then populations could be separated for several years. So this is in the order of millions of years or something. So then you might find that there are two species formed after even if these barriers are removed afterwards, then these two species cannot interbreed anymore. So then they form like two species. This interbreeding part is a very vague definition, but yeah. Then peripatric is basically new niche entered. So this is mostly. Can someone explain what it means?
Well, a group of the main population gets separated or enters a new habitat or new niche, and then they become isolated or don't no longer interact with the main population, and they become a new species. It's rather similar to allopatric, but the difference is instead of two population being split into, the one part of the population enters a new niche or enters a new habitat. Like a group of birds of a population settling on an island.
What can force a animal or what can force a species to enter a new niche?
Forming of land bridges.
That is again allopatric, no?
Well, it can also, I just googled it and it seemed peripatric and allopatric are rather similar.
Hmm.
Well,
Don't Google it. What's the fun in that?
well, just the definition, sir. I had to match it on my own.
Anyone else wants to give an answer? Like, why would a species be forced to go into a new niche?
Well, a lack of resources
Owen,
in its
anyone
own.
else? I said, please.
Oh, sorry, sir.
Yeah.
There may be a limitation of their basic requirement, basically food, water, and shelter.
Yeah. So how can you explain that? Because a little bit. You're right, but though, yeah.
There are so many factors which are forcing to, including these all scarcity of food. Means there should be probability of competition of different group of species. There may
Yeah. Competition can be a big issue over here, where suppose all the ground birds are feeding on the ground, and suddenly there's like no more. I mean, I don't think a new species come or one population realizes that rather than feeding on the ground, probably if it starts pecking or looking for insects slightly above the ground on the higher branches, probably it will get more food. So, and that particular species rather stayed on the tree and never came down to on the ground to feed again. So that is like entering a new niche because of the competition. So
yes. Basically, in hilly areas, during the fodder collection of specific tree species.
yeah.
So I observe there are certain species which are lopped for fodder production, and yes, bird species group are basically dependent on these species.
Yeah.
But during that period of lopping, generally the population of that group of particular species will be reduced.
Yeah.
So these type of disturbances create the condition of
disturbances can be, but that's a very small scale that was small temporal scale that we're talking about. Obviously, speciation happens in a very large time scale, which probably we won't be, and I mean we wouldn't know what kind of effects our habitat disturbance would have on the species formation, but that would only be known after like several thousand millions of years. But yeah, Amarnath Acharya has given a lot of reasons and they seem to be very good. New predator introduction, removal of predator, competition, resource limitation, these are all can force a species to enter a new niche. Parapatric is also, but it's basically in the adjacent niche. Genetic polymorphism. It usually happens in plants like lantana and a lot of other species, where some polymorphism can happen. Like suddenly a plant can turn from diploid to polyploid, and then that would mean that the offspring plant cannot ever breed with the parental generation at all. So, I mean, no, I'm not talking about incest over here, but I'm talking about. So that would mean that it will automatically form a new species if it can spread. So, or if it can form offspring of its own. So that's the.
Sir, could you give an example for peripatric?
Peripatric, like predation can we did the example of those nest, right? There's a ground nesting bird. There are these birds slightly above. I mean, I'm just giving the example that. Yeah, so predation can actually force a bird to move their nest higher up in the trees, right? So that yeah, it can also that particular niche of the ground nesting birds is no longer the most predominant niche. So suddenly, I mean, there are other birds which have nest in higher reaches of the trees or grasses, so they form their own. So I'm not sure of new species formed thus, but yeah, that is how the new niche is entered. If that's
Sir, would rafting be similar part of peripatric, like a species travels on a raft to an island or a new habitat, and
I think that is an allopatric, but yeah, I'm not sure if is that peripatric. Ah.
well, it enters a new niche, doesn't it,
Yeah,
sir?
yeah, it can yeah, it can reach an island and then speciate according to that. Yeah, 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 probably, yeah, yeah. All right.
Basically, in the first instance,
Yeah,
allopatric, the
yeah,
barrier formation is natural,
yeah,
is due to natural causes.
yeah,
Okay. In the others, the species moves from one place to the other.
yeah.
Sir, A can also be caused due to anthropogenic factors, right, sir?
It can be, but the effect won't be seen right now. Is what I'm trying to say.
Right, sir.
Yeah. All right. So this was the Ramchandran paper that was discussed in Robin's lecture on bird. So his paper basically looked at several bird species and the subspecies across Indian subcontinent, and trying to find out if there are these particular barriers across which the subspecies are different. So Park Strait, Godavari River, Goa Gap are all barriers. Yes, Harini, Galapagos finches is basically peripatric, I think. C and D actually. Okay. Let's see what the answer is. It's actually B. Both Park Strait and Godavari are actually physical barriers, biogeographically speaking, and Goa Gap is a climate barrier where one can see the difference, the change happening if one moves from South India, I mean, southern Western Ghats to the northern Western Ghats. Even if you are traveling in Konkan Railway or something, you can see how the climate changes after Goa, or as soon as the yeah. So that's the difference.
Sir, if I remember, all three have physical barriers, right, sir? The Park Strait has like a the part of the sea separating the two parts, and the Goa Gap has an actual gap in the mountain range. So aren't
Yeah,
they
but
both
I'm not.
physical?
I mean, so even Palakkad is like a big gap, much greater than Goa Gap, but even that, yeah, I mean, Goa Gap is a slight barrier, but it's not the physical part that is the barrier for speciation or biogeographically speaking. It's the climate part that's a much bigger barrier in that sense. Like the intensity is higher for climate than the physicality of the barrier.
Right, sir. But what is the Godavari Strait? Is that the Godavari Strait? I don't know about that.
No, there's no strait. Godavari River is what I'm talking about.
Oh, the river that separates.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, sir. Sir, in the context of this question, structuring refers to variation, like differences.
Long-term isolation of population is expected to result in phylogenetic structuring of allelic variation along population. So basically, structuring refers to how do I explain? A result in phylogenetic structuring of allelic variation among population. So okay, think of it like that. Ki, the there are a few alleles in A and few alleles in B. They have commonalities between them, but as soon as the variation or whatever speciation happens, then the commonality decreases, and A and B are have significantly less common alleles in between them. So that's
So it refers to the differences or the
yeah,
similarities, right, sir?
yeah.
So if say for example, in A says allopatric structuring exists, it means in allopatric it refers to that similarities are higher, right, sir?
How?
Well, I'm just asking, does structuring exist means similarities are higher or similarities are lower?
Similarities are lower.
Structuring exists, similarities are lower. Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. All right. Let's see what the answer is. So yeah, structuring exists. So basically, variations are more in allopatric when there is a long-term isolation of population, and in parapatric, the structure is random. Structuring is random. Yes, Govind.
Could I explain the answer, sir?
Yeah, please.
Well, according to my understanding, since in allopatric speciation, the population is literally split in two,
Yeah.
and they exist in two different habitats with several differences between them. So they have to undergo considerable changes, including genetic changes. And since the two populations are isolated, there is no far less connection between them two. So little to no gene flow between them. So the differences, that is structuring, would definitely be low on the lower end. Whereas in parapatric,
The structuring would be
there's a
high. The differences
there's a
would be high.
there's a difference in parapatric. The niche is simply different. Like in Darwin's finches, there's a resource partitioning where some finches go towards picking worms while others go towards picking seeds. There is a difference in niche alone, whereas the general habitat is similar, and there is still greater opportunity for gene flow since the population isn't exactly cut off. So I feel the it's kind of random whether uh, differences are high or low.
Yeah.
Is that an accurate assessment, sir?
Not exactly accurate, but yeah, okay. Molecular support. So the paper name is Molecular Support for Vicarians as a Source of Diversity in Fire for Rainforests. I forgot what the paper was all about. Just a sec, huh? I can share the paper if I find it. Give me a second, people. Okay, let me. Alright, I'll share it a little later. So basically, they were talking about. Okay, I don't understand the use of word structuring here. I mean, for that you'll have to know what FST is. FST in genes, in genetics.
Was this also mentioned in the lecture, sir?
Not sure. I think so. So yeah, we read upon this. This FST is the proportion of total genetic variance contained in subpopulation related to the total genetic variation. So that is FST is basically structure or whatever. So read upon this if you can, and probably you'll understand. So. Also note down the paper that is given over here, and probably that would explain a little more about what this question is all about. Yeah, anyway, the next question is there. Till then, let me find the paper. This is like molecular support for various source of diversity.
Sir, how are the diagrams organized? Like A, B, C, D, E, F.
What do you mean?
Well, does option A correspond to for A diagram or?
No. So basically, this is a sorry. This is so. This is better, and this column is better, and this column is worse, and there is a comparison between. So in A, that would mean that larger. Okay, so so when we look at natural reserves, that would mean that protected areas. So each is surrounded by an altered habitat, resembles a system of island from the point of view of species restricted to the natural habitats. That is understandable, right? People understood that part. So it could mean, I mean, this is basically the opposite of, this is basically what we're talking about, fragmented habitats and all. So when habitats get fragmented, a lot of natural habitats get stuck in between, and it becomes more like a island. So when it comes to species richness, if these are patches, so how does each patch compare? So this is a large patch, this is a small patch. This is A option. I mean, not option A. This is just representation. Then this is B, where a large patch compared with a set of smaller patch, although might have equal area. Then in C, what you see is a set of small area patches compared to again the same set of small area patches, but little distant from each other. Then again set of small area patches. There's this difference in the arrangement of the patches, where you can see that this one patch can be connected to this and this, but over here this one patch can be connected to this and this, but this would only be connected to this. So there's the difference in the arrangement. Then E, there's a difference in how each patch is connected. Over here the connection is weak, almost non-existent, but here the connection is there in form of corridors or something. Then there is F, is the shape of the patch. Is it a round patch, or is it a linear patch? So yeah. Can you guess what the answer could be? So this comes from the island biogeography studies.
Sir, for the question, could the Shola Sky Islands be a good example?
That's a natural patch, of course, yeah. That's a naturally forming patch, but most of the patches that we find in the world right now are these artificially formed patches because of linear intrusion like roads and railways, or habitat destruction like for palm oil cultivation, or invasive timber stands or something like that. So all right, so did we get answers? All right, okay. So the answer is D. So basically that what would mean is in terms of species richness, we might have learned that the larger the patch, or larger the island, or larger the island is, there are more species in that island, and smaller islands would have less species. There would be rarer species present in the larger island, but in smaller islands, the rare species would be less. There would be more general species. Similarly, if even if the areas are same, a more contiguous patch would have much higher species richness than disconnected. Why do you think that is?
There is connection between the different patches, and animals can move in between them. So
Is that the only thing? I mean, animals can still move within these. It's just patches are not very distant, but they're just disconnected.
there are several small patches, sir, and one large patch is superior.
But how?
Large patch has more resources and more area.
No, more that they have the same area.
You mean together, right, sir?
Yeah. Taken together, four patches is equal to these four patches have the same area. In fact, they look like they have larger area. But yeah, let's just consider that they have the same area, and these two have the same area. So there's something called the core area and the edge of the patch. So you might have seen like if you enter a forest, there would be a slight buffer till you don't reach the core of the forest, where the forest is very dense and dark. But till a certain distance, when you enter a forest, you'll find that the light is high, the humidity is very low, and that's the edge of the forest. So what happens is, in those edges, the species that you find are totally different from what you find in the core of the forest. So in a large patch, the edges would be over here. Can you see the screen? The edges would be over here, and the core would be inside. So the species of the core would be present, and the species of the edges would be present. And edges would have a certain thickness, so that buffer could be like what, 150 meter, 200 meter. Sometimes the edges can be as deep as 150 meter. So if this is like a 500 meter ka patch, 500 meter radius ka patch, then the edges are almost like this, like as thick as the cursor that you see. But for this, if you so each patch would have an edge irrespective of how big it is. So and the edge would have equivalent depth, like the edges would have equivalent depth. So if you have a smaller patch, then the smaller patch almost always goes within the edge. There would be no core area to talk about. So the smaller patch does that. If it doesn't have a core area, then the species that are found particularly in core area would be absent from the smaller patches, and that's why you'll have a lesser species diversity or richness in broken patches like this than in the larger contiguous patch. Understood?
Sir, you're saying there's lower habitat quality in the second in 4 smaller patches compared to one larger one due to the higher
No,
density.
I just said there are cores, and there are core species and there are edge species. The core species would be absent from the second diagram
Okay, sir.
because the edge would be of equal thickness, which would so basically if it's a smaller patch, then it would be almost all of it would be edge habitat, which would mean that only edge species would be found and no core species. Similarly over here, this is obvious because there would be a little more movement between these patches, but over here the movement would be highly restricted. Again over here, more movement, more connection. Over here connection would be good for this particular patch, but for the edge, the patches on the edges would have little less connectivity. Then over here again the connectivity would be higher because of the corridor that comes in between. What happens in between over here, like a round patch and a linear patch? What happens over here?
Is it similar to the explanation you gave in the previous one? The more core species in a circular patch as compared to a linear patch?
Yeah, so in the core, in a linear patch, the core would be almost absent. Even if the core edges are, the edge thickness is less, the core would be quite zero because it's linear. So I mean, if you take a buffer, if you offset it with the thickness, it would basically cover the entire patch. So that's the difference. Yeah. Yeah, core is larger. When was this? 720. Yeah. This question is quite intuitive, right? I mean, based on the COVID scene that has happened, in case of an epidemic disease, like a wildlife disease or something, it would be better for the populations to be separated in several small patches than be constricted to a single large patch, even though large patch may have some kind of a separation, but yeah. So the answer is quite intuitive in this case, several small patches. What else could what what other reasons? I mean, which other situations would smaller patches, uh, disjoint smaller patches, be useful to retain species richness? Anyone can think of it?
Would greater speciation be an reason?
No. Let's not go to the speciation part. I just say, okay, apart from epidemic disease, what other reasons can be? I mean, what other situations can there be where smaller patches rather than large contiguous patches would be much useful?
Invasive species, introduced species.
Yeah, because the connectivity is more, like fire, flood, all these places where, like if it's a fire and a small patch gets burned, so because of the disjunct quality of the patches, the fire never reaches the other patch, and the species are still saved in the other patches. So basically, stochastic events. Um, yeah. So, anyways, that's a big. I mean, it was like some years back. There's something called SLOS, single large or several small. Like which is better, like single large patch, contiguous patch, or several small patches. So, I mean, the verdict is never. I mean, still not out. People are still fighting over this. But yeah, I mean, the fight is less right now. It was like some 20 years back when landscape ecology was quite famous. Anyways, this next question.
Sir, is this part of the an old lecture in based on hummingbird energy use?
It is there in one of the reading materials that Mansi had shared. Mansi or yeah, I think Mansi. All right. So the answer is basically both A and B. So this came because of functional. No. Uh, yeah, you'll understand. So these are basically traits that there's a lot more questions on traits in the later half. So yeah, this is simple, right? So the hummingbird's body size is a trait that is the best single predictor of basal metabolism, and the cost of flying and maintaining body temperature at night is also so larger body sized birds can do both, they have good metabolism and like they have low metabolism, and they can also bear the cost of flying and body temperature, but so that means that they have to eat a lot so they defend larger territories, also because they have behaviorally dominant. And but what happens is these larger territories may have plants with greater output of nectar, but there would be certain plants with lesser output of nectar which would be used by smaller birds which cannot defend larger territories. So though basically there are both behavioral dominance by the larger hummingbirds and tolerance for low resources that the smaller hummingbirds do. So both of them are there. So yeah. So this is Mansi's lecture where in a community assembly. So if you're talking about a local if you're talking about a habitat where we are looking at the community of the bird over there, uh, although the although it might seem that the bird species would generally be a subset of the bird species that can actually be present in that particular area. So suppose we're talking about Tamil Nadu, there would be the number of species in the entire Tamil Nadu would be very high. But what we actually find in Nilgiris or Kodaikanal is much smaller subset of the entire species that is found in Tamil Nadu. So why is that? So the regional species pool is the species pool of Tamil Nadu, and the local community pool is the species pool that is present in Kodaikanal or Nilgiris or something. So where is this? Why? What are these major filters that happen where you come from the regional species pool that is reduced to the local community? All right. So basically, the answer is both A and B. So abiotic component, or basically environmental filtering. Abiotic components are basically environmental filtering, which includes all kinds of weather, so the climatic variables, um, and the kind of resources available, particularly the abiotic resources, etc. Then interspecific competition is basically within the species. So these two come together to form the
So does A have greater effects than B?
that we'll see next. And this is quite simple. So basically, Both of them have 4 species, and the species richness is the same. But when you look at the functional diversity, both of them are far different from each other. The first community mostly had barnacles and a mussel, which are very similar to barnacle. But the second community had mussel, then it had a sea star, which is a different kind of a species, then anemone and seagrass. Seagrass is basically very different at even at the trophic level. For example, seagrass is a producer, so that brings in a lot of functional diversity in the second community. And what other kind of diversity? Okay, I'll ask that later.
Sir, the other kind of diversity would be supporting more species, since you have sea stars, anemone, seagrass, mussels. All these species combined together can support greater amounts of species. Anemone, especially, since they can.
You're talking about the
they
niches.
Huh?
Are you talking about the niches?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, probably, possibly. Yeah, 13th question. So the answer was simple. Yeah, functional traits are measurable, so you can measure like the width of the beak, the depth of the beak, the wing span, the wing depth, then the length of the tarsus, feet, etc. These are all measurable traits, particularly the functional traits, and also measure the kind of the diet of the animal, or the behavioral aspects, like how is foraging done? Is it ground feeding, or is it sallying? So these are kinds of the functional traits that can be measured, or at least can be noted down in a better way. But and so it can also help tease apart the effects of environmental filtering and interspecific competition. So most of these traits are, yeah, so the traits can easily be divided into like traits that can I mean, not easily, but mostly can be divided into what is helping it in facing the abatic and abatic components, and what is helping these species in facing the interspecific competition, or reducing the competition. It helps confusion between similar looking species. No, for us to reach to functional diversity, we have to know the species ID. So even if it's similar looking species, if we cannot help differentiate the species, then functional diversity, we cannot reach the functional diversity anyway. So yeah.
Sir, doesn't option A and C have some similarity? Kind of option A implies option C.
What was option A?
Functional traits are measurable. It sort of implies that similar looking species can be confusing, and therefore option A is more viable.
No, so similar looking species can have similar functional traits as well. It's just that it can happen that similar looking species would have similar functional traits related to morphology, but functional traits related to diet and other things can change. So yeah, not exactly. Yeah. All right, I think everyone's answered this. So, environmental filtering is stronger than the interspecific competition. The traits of birds in the local community will be similar. Why would it be dissimilar in case interspecific competition is higher? Anyone wants to answer that?
Sir, could I answer?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If in case of uh, in case of interspecific competition, the and the environmental, well, in such a situation, the environmental conditions would be relatively similar, like say in tropical areas or for rainforests, and in such cases, in one case it allows greater room for different niches and different traits
To develop, yeah.
different traits to evolve.
Yeah.
And also, since there's a larger number of species, resource partitioning must be taken to avoid competition, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So, next question.
sir, what is the difference between A and C, sir? Doesn't phylogenetic diversity tell us species diversity?
So, species diversity doesn't talk about population level differences.
I see, sir. So C is more nuanced than A.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, Sholakili found in Kodaikanal may be slightly different from Sholakili found in Munnar, probably. Like they are divided by like 60 kilometers of hill ranges. So, probably there is not much um, exchange of genetic matter between those populations. So there the species are the same. Yeah, even if it's Cholakili over here or Cholakili over here, that's always called one species. But phylogenetic diversity might be different because the the alleles on this side of the mountain and alleles on that side of the mountain may vary. So the allelic diversity basically. All right. So this answer was also very simple. Yeah, again. So basically, stress dominance hypothesis is basically. Wait, is there in the. So basically, stress dominance hypothesis is applied in any stressful kind of an environment. So it could be pollution, it could be urban development, it could be habitat different disturbances. So anywhere you can. Yeah. So what is stress dominance hypothesis? I think I don't have a question on that.
It's similar to the 14th question, right, sir? The increase in abiotic factors or interspecific competition, like say, the increase in stress of abiotic factors would lead to uh, similarity of species traits,
Yeah.
whereas interspecific competition would lead to greater diversity.
Yeah. All right. Okay, I think people answered. So yeah, so beta traits. So Mansi divided her traits into alpha and beta. Alpha were the ones that were affected by competition, and beta traits were the ones affected by environmental filtering. So yeah.
Sir, I'm a bit confused, sir. Based on the lecture, higher elevation should show greater convergence of beta traits, right, sir? The traits should be more similar.
Yeah, but Mansi's doesn't. And there was a reason for it. She explains the reason.
Right, sir.
Yeah. So what was the reason?
Well, the reason for not showing greater convergence is due to a greater amount of niches there.
Yeah. No. What? Sorry.
Uh, Her example was the Eastern Himalayas, right, sir?
Yeah. So what was the reason? So basically, the reason was she said that she had sampled only till 2,800 meter. That was her limit, elevation limit, right?
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh. So, and the convergence of beta traits happens only beyond 3,000 meter.
Right, sir. Right.
That's when the real the effects of the environment are seen in in the mountains.
Right.
So that can only be tested with the higher peaks of Himalayas, and probably never for Western Ghats and Eastern Ghats. So same thing if done for Western Ghats, then again this great convergence that we are talking about of beta traits or environment traits that are affected by the environment would never happen in Western Ghats and Eastern Ghats, but it definitely might happen in the higher peaks of Himalayas, and that's what she's trying to study further in the future.
It won't happen in Western or Eastern Ghats because they're not high enough, right,
Yeah,
sir?
they're not high enough. Yeah. Anyways, so this is the end of the sheet. Anybody else wants to ask a question or something? Yeah. Then should I? Should I end the session over here?
Um,
Did you say you were looking for something on phylogenetic structuring, or did I misunderstand?
Oh, that paper. I was right. Yeah, here it is. This. The link is there. Probably you can go through the paper again. It's an old paper, 95 papers. It talks about it in a much simpler way. I mean, recent papers would have a very complicated way of explaining things because obviously things have evolved from this paper a lot after that. So yeah. Anyways, I don't know about the exam center details. I don't think anybody else has gotten it because they haven't responded. So yeah, I'll call an end to the session. So yeah, thank you for coming and good night, I suppose. Bye.
sir,
Yeah, go ahead.
just a small question. I didn't watch the week 10 lecture yet, apart from Mansie's live lecture. Did I perform okay in this test?
Yeah, Govind, you were good, I think. But I think the real thing would be in the exam hall, I suppose. I mean, this is going on like week by week, so it's like I mean, yeah, the performance is like or what you have learned is like very piece by piece. So one can perform, but once the entire syllabus comes, then that shows the exact. Yeah, but you were good. Yeah,
Thank you, sir.
great. All right. Good night. Bye.